Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanushalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamin Nitinamine. Namaste Sarasvate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Tinamine Shri Varshabhanavi Devi Daitaya Kripabdhaye Krishna Sambandha Vijnanadayine Prabhave Namaha. Madhuryojjala Premadhya Shri Rupanuga Bhaktida Shri Gaura Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namostute. Namaste Gauravani Shri Murtaye Dinatarine Rupanuga Viruddhapa Siddhanta Dhvantaharine. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Today is the most auspicious appearance day anniversary of His Divine Grace Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is the spiritual master of the founder Acharya of ISKCON, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. So a little about his biography on this day of his divine appearance. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was born on February 6th, 1874, corresponding to Magha Masa Krishna Paksha Panchami. So according to the Vedic calendar, today is that day, Magha Masa Krishna Paksha Panchami. He was born at 3:30 in the afternoon. His name before initiation was Bimala Prasad Datta. He was born in Jagannath Puri, in a house in which Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur, his father, was staying, very near to the temple of the famous Jagannath Baldev Subhadra in Jagannath Puri. He was the fourth son of Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur and Sri Yukta Bhagavati Devi. At the time of his birth, all 32 bodily symptoms of a Mahapurusha, a great personality, were pointed out by an experienced astrologer. Furthermore, the boy was born with his umbilical cord wrapped around his neck like a Brahmin's thread. The astrologer commented at the time of his birth, "I have done many horoscopes in my life, but I have never before seen such a horoscope filled with all the signs of a great personality. This child will become world famous as a brilliant teacher of life's ultimate goal." So this was the comment by the astrologer upon preparing the horoscope of the newly born child. When the child was 6 months old, Lord Jagannath's Rath Yatra festival was in procession. The cart stopped in front of Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur's house for 3 days. Following the instructions of Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur, who was the magistrate in Jagannath Puri at that time, Bhagavati Devi, that is the mother of the child, brought the child before the cart, Jagannath Ratha. An offered garland fell from the neck of Lord Jagannath, encircling the boy. This was taken as a sign of special favor by all present. The child is blessed by Lord Jagannath. At the time of the grain ceremony, it was customary to offer the child both coins and books in order to get some indication of the future tendencies of the child. It means one side they will keep some money and one side they'll keep the Bhagavatam, the books. So he was offered, the child, on one side coins and the other side the Srimad Bhagavatam. He accepted the Bhagavatam instead of the coins. So this also indicates the future of the child. Therefore, from the very beginning of his appearance, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur exhibited all the signs of an exalted eternal associate of the Lord. He had descended in answer to Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur's prayer for a ray of Vishnu to help him spread the Krishna consciousness movement. Now, Srila Prabhupada explains the meaning of a ray of Vishnu. Prabhupada says, there are two kinds of children born of good fathers. One is educated in Krishna consciousness so that he can be delivered from the clutches of Maya in that very life. And the other is a ray of Vishnu who teaches the world the ultimate goal of life. So, Thakur Bhaktivedanta also wanted to beget a child who could preach the philosophy and teachings of Lord Chaitanya to the fullest extent. Bhaktivedanta Thakur himself was a preacher, a great acharya. But he prayed to the Supreme Lord, I want to have a child who can preach the teachings of Lord Chaitanya to the fullest extent, preach all over the world. By his prayers, that is by Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur's prayers to the Lord, he had as his child Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Goswami Maharaj, who at the present moment is preaching the philosophy of Lord Chaitanya throughout the entire world through his bona fide disciples. This is what Srila Prabhupada explains. What is the meaning of the word? Term, ray of Vishnu. That means Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami was specially empowered by Lord Chaitanya simply for the sake of preaching Krishna consciousness all over the world. That's an exclusive purpose for which he appeared in this world. When he was a small boy, perhaps 2 or 3 years old, his father, Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur, brought some ripe mangoes from the market. It was the season of mangoes. Bimal Prasad, that was his name when he was born. Bimal Prasad took one to eat, saying, "This is mine." Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur got up and said in a grave voice, "What is this? New fruit has come into the house. It has not been offered to Lord Krishna, and you have taken it first. Remember, new fruit is to be given first to the Lord. Without giving the first share to the Lord, nothing is to be taken." The child was very repentant upon hearing this from his father, and he exclaimed, "What evil thoughts I have had! Throughout my whole life, I shall not eat these fruits again. This is the right punishment for one ruled by greed." So this is what the child exclaimed. He made the promise and observed it throughout his whole life. Later on, when somebody would offer him nice mangoes, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur would say, "I'm an offender. I don't deserve to eat these mangoes." In this way, he observed that vow never again to eat mangoes. Just because a small child had done a small mistake, but he took it very, very seriously. This is the characteristic of the Acharya. When Bimal Prasad was 7 years old, Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur was constructing the Bhakti Bhavan in Calcutta at Rambagan. During that construction, a deity of Lord Kurma was unearthed. Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur ordered his son Bimal Prasad to begin regulated worship of that deity of Lord Kurma. From the very beginning, the boy used to hear the preaching of his father, Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur's preaching, with rapt attention. Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur as well as his audience were amazed to see how a small boy could hear the topics of Krishna consciousness with such total absorption. By the age of 7, he had committed the entire Bhagavad Gita to memory and could wonderfully explain the verses as well. See, this is a special thing. There may be some children who can commit to memory all the 700 verses. But a 7-year-old small boy being able to explain all the verses very nicely, that is extremely unusual. Later on, he was trained in publishing and proofreading at Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur's printing press in connection with Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur's well-known spiritual journal, the Sajjana Toshani. At the age of 11, Bimal Prasad toured the various places of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Leelas with his father. Bimal Prasad had a photographic memory. Whatever he would read once, he could later recall with perfect clarity. He was trained in mathematics and astrology at Sri Rampur School, and he achieved such astounding scholarship that he was eventually awarded the title Siddhanta Sarasvati by his tutors Pandit Mahesh Chandra Chauramani and Pandit Sundarlal. Just when he was 11 years old, he was awarded this title Siddhanta Saraswati. During this period, he used to attend the Sunday weekly meetings of Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur's Vishwa Vaishnava Rajya Sabha and hear his father lecture on the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu of Srila Rupa Goswami. He was never known to study his school assignments, and while sitting at home, he would replace those assignments with studies of devotional literatures like Srila Narottam Das Thakur's Prarthana and Prema Bhakti Chandrika. However, whenever questions were asked by his teachers, he would immediately answer, and he got excellent results on all of his examinations at school. When the boy was in 7th class, Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur brought tulsi beads for his son from Jagannath Puri and gave him the name of Hari and a Narsimha mantra to chant, which he executed very faithfully along with the worship of his Kurma deity according to the instructions of his father Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur. At the age of 16, while his schooling continued, the books of Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur formed the serious content of his studies. He also began writing books on astrology. In 1892, at the age of 18, Bimal Prasad, who had got the title of Siddhanta Saraswati, took an entrance examination and entered Calcutta Sanskrit College. As before, he paid scant attention to the prescribed books, but he found the time to read all of the philosophical books contained in the library. In 1895, he left the college as he was very eager to execute his worship of the Lord and to remain free from the pressure to enter family life. He stated in his autobiography, "If I remain studying with careful attention at the college, Sanskrit college, then extreme pressure will be brought upon me to enter family life. But if I am considered to be foolish and inefficient, then no one will put such an inducement upon me for becoming so engaged. By this consideration, I left the Sanskrit college, and in order to maintain my life for the service of Hari, I was desirous of getting an honest occupation which I could perform with the intention of earning a humble income. During his student days, he also wrote essays on spiritual topics for various magazines and strongly condemned various religious malpractices which had become prominent in society. At the request of Srila Jagannath Das Babaji, he composed the Navadvip Panjika, a Krishnaized almanac in which the months, lunar fortnights, days, lunar days, stars, etc. were all given names of Vishnu. He did not spend very long in his astronomical pursuits, however, and soon dedicated himself fully to the worship and distribution of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Siddhanta Sarasvati had been engaged in regularly chanting the Mahamantra and a Nisimha mantra given to him by Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur when he was in the 7th class. He had been worshipping the Kurma deity since the age of 7. From 1885 onward, he had received special training in printing, editing, etc. at the press at the Bhakti Bhavan. Thus, the young man was a very qualified candidate for becoming the disciple of a guru. Many pseudo-gurus of the Sahajiya category wanted to have him as their disciple to increase their false prestige. But Siddhanta Saraswati was not interested in such pretenders. Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur explains, during his time, there were so many upper sampradayas claiming to be representing Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur rightly pointed out how people had deviated, many different groups of people claiming to be followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but not strictly following the actual regulative principles, compromising on the strict rules and regulations of sadhana bhakti, but externally dressing themselves as devotees and concocting their own methods of worship, deviating from the philosophy taught by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the philosophy of bhakti, and misleading the mass of people. So only because of such acharyas as Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur and later on Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, are we able to distinguish between the genuine teachings of Lord Chaitanya, strictly according to the authorized scriptures, Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, and the deviant teachings and false philosophical doctrines of the deviants. In 1898, after Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur had constructed his residence in Navadvip Dham at Godruma Dvipa and called it Swananda Sukhada Kunja, and had also discovered Lord Chaitanya's birth site, Srila Gaur Kishodas Babaji Maharaj arrived in Navadvip Dham to see the site of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's birth and to hear the discourses of Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur. Srila Gaur Kishodas Babaji Maharaj was singing in ecstasy when he arrived in Navadvip. His only possessions were the Tulsi Mala he wore around his neck and another set he kept in his hand for counting. He was extremely renounced, and genuinely so. He kept a few books such as Narottam Das Thakur's Prarthana and Prema Bhakti Chandrika. Srila Gaurkishodas Babaji had been performing bhajana for many years in Vrindavan. He was extremely renounced and was the disciple of another great renunciant, Bhagavad Das Babaji, who was the disciple of Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj. Srila Gaurkishodas Babaji was not very well educated and had been a grain merchant in his previous ashrama. But it was widely known that he was a liberated Paramahamsa of the highest caliber in the area of Vraja Mandala. At the time of his arrival, Srila Gaurkishodas Babaji Maharaj was wearing a cap made of tiger skin and was carrying a basket of various items and materials for his devotional service. He spotted Siddhanta Sarasvati and offered him 4 or 5 pieces of knotted rope for chanting rounds, a tilak stamp with the initials for Hare Krishna, the tiger skin cap and paraphernalia for worship. Gaurkishodas Babaji Maharaj had received the basket and the cap from his spiritual master Bhagavad Das Babaji Maharaj. Siddhanta Sarasvati was very attracted to Gaurkishodas Babaji Maharaj. At the first sight, he was later to comment with humility, "I have been busy within this material world trying to bring sense gratification within the grasp of my hand. I have often thought by obtaining the objects of sense gratification, all my shortcomings will be fulfilled. I often attained different facets that were indeed very rare, but my own personal shortcomings were never mitigated. In this material world, I have had the association of very high-class aristocratic persons. However, seeing their various deficiencies, I could not offer them praise. The most merciful Supreme Lord Sri Gaurasundara, that is Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, seeing me in such a lamentable condition at such a time of adversity, gave permission to 2 of his dearmost devotees, Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur and Srila Gaurkishodas Babaji Maharaj, to grant their blessings to me. Because I was always intoxicated with a worldly false ego, wanting again and again self-appraisal, I deprived myself of my own real benefit. But because of the influence of my previous birth's activities and devotional service, I came into the association of Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur, who was the form of my spiritual well-wisher. My spiritual master, from whom I took Diksha, Srila Gaurkishodas Babaji Maharaj, would go and visit Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur and many times would reside with him. Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur, out of his compassion for other living entities, pointed out my spiritual master Srila Gaurkishodas Babaji Maharaj. Upon seeing my spiritual master, the extent of my worldly false ego diminished. I knew that all the other living entities who have taken the human form of life were also fallen and low like myself. But by gradually observing the spiritual character of my spiritual master, I realized that only a Vaishnava could reside in this material world and be of exemplary character. So Shastras say a true Vaishnava is decorated with all good qualities. Yasyasti bhakti bhagavati akinchana sarvair gunais tatra samasate suraha. At Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur's urging, Siddhanta Saraswati approached Srila Gaurkishodas Babaji for initiation in the month of Magha of the year 1900. Srila Gaurkishodas Babaji Maharaj expressed reluctance to accept Siddhanta Saraswati as a disciple, knowing him to be a very great scholar. Of course, Srila Gaurkishore Babaji Maharaj was not known to be well educated, but he was a liberated Paramahamsa, a devotee of the topmost caliber through his devotional service. So, when Siddhanta Saraswati pleaded with Gaurkishore Babaji Maharaj for initiation, he got the reply that Mahaprabhu will be asked, and if Mahaprabhu gives me permission, then only I will initiate you. So Siddhanta Saraswati approached him again after some days and asked him, what was Mahaprabhu's order? Gaurkishore Babaji Maharaj replied, I forgot to ask. The third time Gaurkishore Babaji Maharaj was requested, he replied, I asked Mahaprabhu, but I did not receive the permission from Mahaprabhu to initiate you. Siddhanta Saraswati then stood up, his heart breaking, and said, Karuna na hoile kandiya kandiya prana na rakhibo ara. If there is no mercy, weeping and weeping, I will give up my life. After thus indicating his readiness to take his life, Siddhanta Saraswati began to cry. Srila Gaurkishore Babaji Maharaj's heart was melted to see this. So he told Siddhanta Saraswati, go take your bath in the Saraswati river and then come back to me. At that time of initiation, Siddhanta Saraswati received the name Shri Varshabhanavi Devi Dayita Das. This is another name for Radharani, Varshabhanavi Devi. So he is given the name of the servant of one who is very, very dear to Radharani, and that is Krishna. So he got the name as servant of Krishna. In 1898, Siddhanta Saraswati had accompanied his father to Kashi, Prayag and Gaya and had gathered many facts about all these holy places, which were later incorporated into his commentary on the Chaitanya Charitamrita called Anubhashya. So, Srila Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, whose name later was Sri Varshabhanavi Devi Dayita Das, he was engaged in compilation of a Vaishnava encyclopedia which contained an explanation of Vaishnava terminology, brief biographies of great Vaishnavas, an introduction to the books of the Vaishnava Acharyas, a description of Vaishnava Tirthas, and various conclusions of Vaishnava sects. So this compilation is a very, very valuable compilation, and the work was begun in Puri and continued as Siddhanta Saraswati made his preaching rounds of Sri Mayapur Dham, Sri Jagannath Puri Dham, Sri Vraja Dham. He also studied the various books of Srila Madhvacharya and Sri Ramanujacharya and published some of them in Bengali. He published biographies of these and other Vaishnava saints in the Sajjana Toshani magazine of Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur. So, there are a lot more details. I don't have time to narrate the whole biography. In conclusion, today being the most auspicious day of his divine appearance, let us pray to him for his blessings so that we can very rapidly make advancement in Krishna consciousness by his mercy. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.